Hey, we have Steve Huffam who is here to show us some things about resin casting. And since I don't know a whole lot about resin casting, or Steve, either one for that matter, Steve, would you tell us a bit about your experience with resin casting and what made you excited about sharing with us this morning?
Okay. Um, Basically, I'm new to turning. I've only been turning probably 3 years, and resin casting even a whole lot less than that. Um, I just wanted to expand my horizons, so to speak. Uh, I didn't want to just do bowls and that's it, and do bowl after bowl after bowl because the wife says, "What am I going to do with all these bowls?" Um, so I decided I'd do something different. Make pin blanks, make resin castings, do stuff like that. So that's where we're at, and that's where or why I started doing it. And you can make some pretty stuff, the women like that. So anyway, with that, I'll get started, and I want to start off by saying that I'm not an expert. I'm learning every day as we go along. I'm a YouTube junkie. I watch video after video after video and try to learn as much as I can. And I don't know everything, but I know enough to get in trouble. Okay. Um, First thing first is safety. You don't want this stuff on your hands, this resin or the cactus juice for stabilizing. You don't want that on your hands. I'm not sure, I'm not a chemical guy, but I'm sure if it soaks into your skin, it's going to do terrible things to your body. So wear gloves. I use the kind mostly from Harbor Freight, but they were out of it for a long time. So I got these 5 mil ones off of Amazon, but most of the time I get them from Harbor Freight, the 5 and the 7 mil. The 7 mil if I'm going to reuse them, but most of the time I just use the 5s. Couldn't get N95 masks, so I was able to come across the KN95s, which is the China made N95s, and they're better than nothing. I wear safety glasses. I have a respirator because you don't want to breathe this stuff when you're turning. There's a fine mist in the air, and it just covers the shop actually, and you don't want to breathe that. So I have a respirator here. I have a mask that I wear, that wraps around my neck type thing. So it just depends. And some people are actually very allergic to resin dust. Kind of like there's people that are allergic to walnut dust and cedar dust and that kind of stuff. I definitely have to wear a mask when I turn cedar because I start getting headaches and stuff. Okay. Yeah. Up there I have the regular face mask, but when I'm doing resin, I normally wear that trend mask, and that way it blows air across from me. And I also have at the same time I wear one of these KN95 masks just as a added precaution, because you don't want to breathe this stuff. Okay. Breathing the fume, breathing the dust. Depending on which resin you choose is what you do next. And basically there's 3 kinds of resins. There's epoxy, there's polyester, and then there's urethane. And I normally use the urethane one, the Alumalite. Alumalite is, You can do deep pours with it. You can do little pours with it. You can, you know, color it. It doesn't take forever. It's got a 12-minute pot life, so working time. You got 12 minutes to get it in the pressure pot, and you do need a pressure pot with Alumalite. And you've got a part A and B, and it's measured by weight. And depending on which resin you choose, they're either by weight or by volume. And you know, you can choose which resin you want. I think Total Boat it's like a 2-to-1. There's a 3-to-1. There's even a 5-to-1 ratio, and you just have to know which one you're using. I have a preference. I use the only one I use is Alumalite. It's just, from the videos I've watched, there's plenty of people out there that use Total Boat. And if you really watch their videos, you'll notice that if they do deep pours, they'll end up with cracks because it heats up so fast in the pressure pot that it cracks. Alumalite doesn't do that. A lot of them, Total Boat, Liquid Diamonds, they have a working time of about an hour. And if you're trying to do colors and you're trying to keep the colors separated, you got to wait until the resin gets hot enough to where it starts to gel, and then they won't blend together. And I don't want to wait an hour for that. So Alumalite is 12 minutes, and I have to get it in the pressure pot. Okay, there's a YouTube video out there by, the guy's name is Matt. It's M-A-T-T-S, Matt's Woodworks, and he did a comparison video on 13 different resins, and it's an excellent video. He did some polyurethane, polyester, urethane, polyester, and regular epoxies, and he did all kinds of tests on them, and I'll let you be the judge on that. He shows the different costs, the hardness, everything involved with that. It's an excellent video. Matt's Woodworks. Just search on YouTube and you'll come up with it. Okay, so you got your resin. Now you got to have all these supplies to go with it. You're going to have to come up with different buckets. Now with Alumalite, it's by weight, so you got to have a scale. I have a scale. It goes up to 3,000 grams. It's a scale that goes to the 0.1 gram. So I use that. Grams is, if you go by ounces, there's too much leeway in there. And Alumalite, you need to have an exact measurement. You can't be very much off at all. Like if you have a small pour of, say, 50 grams of A, you got to have 50 grams of B. If you try to put in 55 grams of B or less A than B, you're going to have problems. It's just not going to set up well. So it's got to be pretty exact. If you're going to go with 500 or 1,000 gram pour, then you can be off by a gram or two. You know, I might go 1,000 grams of A, I might go up to like 1,003 of B. You can be off a couple of grams, and it'll be fine when you're having that much. But if you're going to decide to use like Total Boat or one of those, these measuring cups from like Home Depot, they have different scales on them for the 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, all that. You can do that, or it has ounces. So you can use it that way. Again, I use the ones from Alumalite, I have to use by weight, so I have a scale. Different cups. I have little cups for like individual colors. I have a little bigger cup for that. Even more depending on the size of the pour. So it's just, you got to have a variety of cups. Along with that, I've got a variety of stirring sticks. Now, I bought all these mainly from Hobby Lobby, I think. But then I decided that it'd be better off to have silicone. And these silicones, you can just wipe them off after your project, and they're good for next time. It's better for the environment. You're not throwing away sticks all the time. But so I use these silicone sticks more than anything else. And I even got a couple in here that I stir with. Measuring sticks or measuring spoons. I bought this at like the dollar store. Very cheap, doesn't have to be fancy, just something real cheap. Along with that, you're gonna need different colors. I bought all these at Hobby Lobby. You can get them on the internet. You can buy them at Amazon. There's powders. There's these liquid dyes. This is a transparent dye, so no matter what you put in there, it's gonna be transparent. You can see through it. And then there's dyes. These are alcohol dyes. That, again, bought it from Hobby Lobby. And then I have these ones here that's from the color or solarcolordust.com people, and it's the one that shows it's color transferring. You know, if you look at it one way, it's blue, one way it's purple, and so on, that kind of thing. Okay, next thing is, actually I'd like to jump over there just 1 second. Before, if you want to do this whole picture, then you've got to use stabilization. You got to have dry wood. You can't, Alumalite especially doesn't like humidity and moisture. So you've got to make sure your wood is completely dry, 0% moisture content. And I have a toaster oven right over here. See it right there? Yeah. A toaster oven right there that I put the wood in there to get it down to 0. I weigh it first, put it in there for an hour, weigh it again, just keep doing that until I'm down to 0 before I do any kind of resin casting with that piece of wood. Now, if you've got a piece of punky wood that you want to use, like some kind of punky spalted maple or something to that effect, you can put it in what's called Cactus Juice. You soak it in there for a while, and then you put it under vacuum. You have a vacuum pump under a vacuum chamber. A vacuum chamber will suck out the air out of the piece of wood. Wood is just full of air. So the vacuum chamber will suck out all the air out of the wood and replace it with resin cactus juice. And then once you take it out of there, once the bubbles are gone, you know that it's full of cactus juice and no air is in there again. Then you wrap it up with aluminum foil. You put it in the oven over there, and there's 3 different temperatures you need to know on the oven. One is 165, which is for your heating up your molds, your Hdpe molds, if you have them. One is 195, which is drying your wood once you've put it in the cactus juice, and the other one is about 220. And I say 220, and that's the one you need to dry your wood, because it's got to be above the boiling point, and boiling point is 212 degrees. So you got to get it above 212. So I always just set mine on 220. And I've got a couple of auxiliary thermometers in there, because the temperature gauge on those toaster ovens are crappy. Okay, so anyway, this, by example, this piece of wood right here, before I put it in the vacuum chamber and put resin in there, it weighed 3.8 ounces. And after stabilization and drying it and making it hard and all that kind of stuff, now it weighs 12.8 ounces. So it gained 9 ounces. It like tripled its weight or quadrupled its weight. So now I can turn this on a lathe. I can make a bottle stopper out of it or something like that, or a couple of bottle stoppers. But if I tried to put this on there before, as punky as it was, it would have just shattered. It would have been no good at all. Now, for those that don't want to go and use the expense of the vacuum pump and the vacuum chamber. Now this is a 5-gallon vacuum chamber. They have smaller ones, but I just wanted a 5-gallon because that's the way I am. Home Depot sells this stuff here. It's called wood. It's wood hardener. It's like $12 for this can, but it does harden the wood. As an example of that, let me real quick. I just made this tool handle. It's too big to go in my vacuum chamber. So, and it's a coffee bean, which is a kind of a medium hardness wood. So I wanted to make sure it was super, super hard. So I soaked it with this on the lathe. I just soaked it in there 2 or 3 coats, sanded it out and everything. So now it's just like using Cactus Juice and putting it in a vacuum chamber. Okay, what else? Let's go into molds here. I have a variety of molds that I made. For instance, this one back here, I couldn't see. I like these burls, so I couldn't see spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on burl all the time. I couldn't afford to do that, so I bought one big piece for like $100, and then I made a mold of it. Then I decided to cut it up into smaller pieces, and I made molds of them. So that's the original piece right there. It fits in that mold. But now I'm able to duplicate that. I'm still working on trying to get the colors right and everything, but that's an exact replica of this one. So I can reproduce that time after time after time. I did the same thing over here. This piece fits in here. And this piece is an exact copy of that. I just made that one yesterday, as a matter of fact. And then I have another one right here that's a little smaller than that. But the point here is I can reproduce them. I can encapsulate them. Like I've got this one. Yeah. You guys have seen that one before. It was on the show and tell. And this is actually this one right here that I painted the top of it, put some shoe polish on it, and that's not wood, that's resin. And then I cast it into a thing, put a rose in it, or it's a fake rose, and did that. And then I have, these are cheap molds that I bought off of Amazon. That was like the first one I bought just to have something. But since then I've gone on to, you know, making my own molds, Hdpe molds. I can do different ones. And the mold making material is this right here. Again, from Alumalite, it's Plat 25. And you mix those two together and you can make molds. You can make a mold out of pretty much anything. Like this is a 4-inch PVC pipe. I took a 6-inch, cut it down. Now I have a 5-inch. And then I have a 6-inch. So depending on what I want to do, I've got a different mold for everything, pretty much. Any questions so far? Okay, the rice.
Yeah, Steve, I've got a question.
Okay.
This is Tom. You talked about your vacuum chamber and the pressure pot. Are those interchangeable or are they different?
No, they're specific to what you're wanting to do. The vacuum
In other words,
chamber,
if you bought a pressure pot, could you use it as a pressure chamber as well as a vacuum chamber?
I suppose you could, but the gauges are different. The gauges are different.
Okay.
This one is it tells you how many pounds of air you're putting in there. This one is of inches of mercury that you're taking out. So you're taking air out, and this gauge is for that. And to get full vacuum, you need to be up around 30, 29 or 30. And that's the reason I had to buy this particular vacuum pump, is because my gassed vacuum pump over there that I use for, a vacuum chuck, it was only pulling like 24, 25, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting good stabilization on my wood. And then I did some research and read some articles and figured out that 24, 25 inches of mercury is not enough, that I need to be up around 29 or 30. So I had to quit using that and just went out and bought a pump for this. And they have different pumps. They have real expensive pumps, and then they have cheaper pumps. Harbor Freight sells pumps, and you can go from there. But the vacuum chamber is for taking air out, and the pressure pot is for pressurizing your bubbles, because when you stir, you're going to introduce bubbles to your resin. And you got to get those bubbles out unless you really want them in there, but most of the time you don't. You want them clear. So what that does is it pressurizes the bubbles, and it makes them so small that you can't see them. They basically just go away. And that's the whole idea behind that.
Good,
Steve,
thanks.
this is Ross.
I understand the difference between vacuum and pressure, but I didn't know if one pot could work on both. Thanks.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Steve, this is Ross.
Uh-huh.
What do you use to create the pressure in the pressure pot?
Oh, compressor. I have an air compressor that I use. Right now, this particular pressure pot, it says on the outside here, 80 pounds is the max. I normally fill it up to about 60, 65, something like that. Alumalite says that they need at least 40, but I always go to about 60, 65. But, and then it's, depending on what you're doing, it's a 2 to 4 hour demold time. You can pull it out of there within 2 hours if it's kind of a medium size project, or if it's really small, you need to leave it in there for a full 4 hours for whatever reason. I don't know why that's when it's smaller, it takes longer, but it does. And at the same token, I went ahead and made a rack that goes inside of the pressure pot. And that way I've got 3 tiers. I can put different levels of stuff. I can put different molds on each level, and those drop down if I need to have something tall. And it works out pretty good. And talking about pressure pots, this one here, this is the Harbor Freight one. This is my first one. It works fine. There was nothing wrong with it. I just wanted something bigger. And this one, I went ahead and bought a rack for that. But it works fine. And it's for sale, by the way. If anybody wants to contact me about that, I'll sell it to them. Now, jumping back to the vacuum chamber, this particular vacuum chamber was one that I made. I bought this pot at Walmart. It's the biggest, thickest pot I could find, like a stock pot type thing. I bought a inch thick piece of acrylic off of Amazon, put the gauges on there and everything. It worked fine while I was using the gas pump, but as soon as I hooked it up to my other pump that pulls 29 or 30, the lid cracked. See that? Yeah, the lid cracked. So that's why I don't use this one anymore. And if you're gonna have a vacuum chamber, go with a glass lid. Don't go with acrylic, because they will crack eventually, especially if you put the gauge down through the acrylic, through the top. But I didn't want to punch a hole in the side of the pot, so I just went with that. But that's a lesson learned on my part. Okay, where are we at here? If by chance you don't want a pressure pot and you figure that the expense is too much for you, you can always get rid of the bubbles with either a little torch or a heat gun or something like that. I have the torch, but I don't use it for that purpose. And the pressure pot works great for me. When you're casting the resin and you want to do color separation, you're going to need a temperature gun. Just to show you what the temperature is, like right now it says my table is 71 degrees. So they work pretty good. And you want color separation on your Alumalite or your epoxy resin happens after about 95 degrees. It gets 95 to 105 is generally your go-to temperature. You can go higher, but then it gets kind of thick and syrupy, and you better get it in the pot real quick or you're going to have problems. And I talked about scale. Okay, what else? Different colors. These colors I just bought off the internet. They were just super cheap. You're going to need a timer because the Alumalite especially is, they say it's a 12-minute working time. And if you don't have it in the pot within 12 minutes, it's going to cure wrong. And you're going to have bubbles in there. It's not going to be able to get rid of all the bubbles. What else? Oh, and on your, they have mold releases. This is the one that I use for pretty much everything. If you're going to do PVC pipes, you want to spray Stoner. And that's just kind of, it's kind of like a Pam cooking spray type thing, but you don't want to use Pam. But this Stoner stuff, it keeps your resin from sticking to your mold. And I've forgotten a couple times to put that on, and I end up having to turn it off or cut it off, one or the other. I kind of skipped around this, but I'll go back to it. I have a big tub of rice right here. And this helps in determining how much resin you need. Alumalite and some of the other ones have calculators on their website, but I took a cue from some of the guys on the YouTube, and they use rice. They'll put rice in a mold, and then figure out how many ounces that is. And if you're using grams, then you take the ounces times 28.35, and that gives you a total number of grams. And that's basically what I do. But what I've done is I've filled these up, and I went ahead and this way. I went ahead and put how many grams is in each mold. I filled each mold with the rice, so I know how much resin I got to work up, you know, and then that's like 400 grams would be 200 of each A and B. That's just for like this, and yeah, accounting for the piece, like this mold here, it's 240 grams, and that makes the mold, or it makes one of those right there. Oh, if you're putting stuff in there, yeah, yeah. You basically, like, okay, for instance, which one did I do? I cast what's on the lathe right now. I cast in this 6-inch pipe. And on the bottom of the pipe, I'm gonna go over here. On the bottom of this, I had one of these that I had cast. So I know how much by working the calculation for, you know, total volume of a cylinder, and I know how much this is because I have a mold that says it's 410 grams. So if you take, I don't know if you want to hear this, but it's pi r square times the height times the Alumalite number that they use, 0.554, and then you get that number, and that gives you the number of ounces that you need. You take that times 28.35, and it gives you the number of grams. So I won't spend a lot of time on that because you probably don't want to hear that. But that's the way that works. So if I know how much is in, how much, and I got a little tick mark in there. So I do the calculation for this, subtract this because I know it's 410 grams, and it basically came out perfect. And I've got one on the lathe right now that I've turned, or that I'm getting ready to turn. Any other questions? I know it's a lot, and I've kind of jumped around a little bit, but this is a hobby that, for one, it's not cheap, and it really depends on how much you want to put into it, on how much you want to spend. You don't need, you know, to buy globe molds, but I did. You don't need to buy a $100 piece of burl to make a mold, but I did. The PVC pipes are real cheap. You don't need silicone stirring sticks, but I'm a guy that likes convenience, so that's why I bought all that stuff.
Great.
I don't like to struggle. I like to have everything laid out. I think it out in advance, and I know exactly what I need when I need it, and I do things that way. The only other thing I had was I never thought I would use a glue gun as much as I do, but you can put like that PVC, you can stick it down to a lid off of a bucket and then hot glue it on there and it stays. So, because you don't want it to leak. Glue sticks are cheap. Resin is not. Just to give you a kind of a rundown of different prices. I'm going to scare you off, but the Harbor Freight pressure pot was about $100, and then you got a coupon and all that. And then I paid $38 for that rack that's inside of it. This pressure pot, the California Air Tools, on Amazon, it sells for like $285 or something like that. You can buy one off of Amazon from Woodcraft, and then you got to pay shipping and all that. And I figured, well, I'm only a couple hours from there, and I picked a day where I was going to go to Nebraska Furniture Mart anyway, so I went to Woodcraft and just bought one. I didn't have to pay for shipping, and they gave me the 10% discount for the club. So that worked out pretty good. The big vacuum chamber was about $120, and again, that's the 5-gallon one. They have smaller ones, much smaller ones, 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 3 gallon, or even little cylinders. The pump, I probably bought a bigger pump than I really need, but I wanted to make sure it was going to work, so I paid $130 for that. The Alumalite, it's about $160 for this big gallon size jug, but I always wait for like some kind of discount, a 10 or 20% discount, and I buy it then. Just as a comparison, the total boat is like $167, $169, so it's comparable in price. But some of those guys you see on YouTube that use Total Boat, they're using it because they get it for free. Total Boat supplies them with that. One guy in particular, I was actually talking to, it's the pole barn guy, Doug Moore out of Michigan. I was in contact with him, and he said the only reason he uses Total Boat is because they give it to him. If not, he would use Alumalite. The Cactus Juice. Cactus Juice is about $89 for a gallon of that. And the good thing about that is it's reusable. It doesn't evaporate. You can use it and then just pour it back in the jug, what's left, and use it next time. You want to see it? And it's sold by a guy in Texas. That's why it's Cactus Juice, duh. Okay. And I said that wood hardener was about $12.98 at Home Depot. And what else? Oh, one point I need that picture of the one point I skipped over that I should have talked about. Yeah. Back a few years ago, when Tom Boley did this, I actually liked that idea, and I wanted to make one of myself. So the first thing I did was I just got some walnut chips from this guy in Michigan, made my platter, cast it in a pressure pot, and this is what came out. And this is moisture. And if you remember, those that remember Tom when he did his, he sealed his he put a coating on there to seal the wood, to keep the moisture from getting into the walnut chips, and I didn't do that. I should have on the first one I did. So from that point on, I actually put the walnut chips in the toaster oven to dry them out, make sure they were dry, and the wood, I made sure it was dry, and I also coated it. And from that, you know, I made these. So, and if you remember, when I did these, this was the first one I did, this big one. And then here's the smaller one I did. I did like 15 of these and sent them out to friends and family for Christmas one year. And while we're here at the table, for those that haven't seen this was a globe that I cast and made an ornament out of it. So it changes colors and everything like that. And it's, but that's the kind of stuff you can do with resin. You know, this one here, I just was playing around. I just turned it. I wanted to see, this was the one I was playing with. I have a sphere jig for making spheres. And this is actually not wood, it's resin. And I just made a clear globe on there and decided to turn it. I was messing with my sphere jig, and that's how that one turned out. Just yesterday, I was playing around. I got some wood, a big chunk of wood that's not good for anything. You couldn't do anything with it other than make it firewood or something. Well, I put it in the cactus juice after I dried it. Put it in cactus juice, vacuumed it, got all the air out of it, put it in the toaster oven, heated it up, and then I cast it in resin and just made a little bowl out of this. I mean, once I finish this and put some finish on there and polish it up, that's going to be a pretty nice looking bowl. And this one, for those that haven't seen it, I just took some pine cones, put them in resin, and turned it. And I knew my wife was going to put some of that, it looks like grassy stuff that she puts in there that lights up. So I kept them apart so you'd be able to see that. But that's the kind of stuff, and all you need to do with resin is you just need an imagination, basically, which I don't have a lot of, but I'm sure guys like David will come up with some fantastic stuff if he decides to get into this. But the only other thing I wanted to talk about, let's see, I covered everything, I believe. Any questions so far?
Steve, I have a question. This is David, the guy with all the imagination.
Yeah.
Now, I was intrigued with your burl casting. Have you cast other objects? The piece you showed last month, I remember being taken aback by that when you told me that was not a real burl, that was a casting of a burl. Have
Right.
you cast, well, like seashells or I don't know what, any other objects like that?
No, not yet. And as I stated, David, I'm still pretty new at this. I mean, I'm not an expert at this by any means. I mean, I'm always looking at internet or YouTube to find more things out about this, and I haven't got into the seashells and different things. The only thing I've done is those walnut chips so far, and making my own molds because I didn't want to keep paying money for burl.
No, that's a fantastic idea.
There's a place, Worldwide Burl, has auctions daily on Instagram, and you can go on there and bid bid for pieces of burl anywhere from $50 to a couple $100. Just depends on how nice the piece is, how many people are going to how many people, you can sit on the floor, how many people are going to bid on it. But there's other places to get burl. You can get burl on eBay. But I just like burl because it's got all them bumps. You can make it look like the moon or something like that. And
Steve, this is Barb. I have a question about your paint.
About my
Your
what?
painting. So
Okay.
you mentioned shoe polish to get some of the coloring
Yes.
pearl that you made.
Yes.
You know, painting on plastic doesn't always work with all paints. So could you talk a little bit more about what kind of paints you can use to paint resin?
You're gonna laugh at this one, but this is makeup that I bought at the dollar store. Here's the brown shoe polish that I use, but this is bronzer. See, I figured this would be about this color of burl, so I bought these. These are like $3 at the dollar store, and I've been experimenting with those a little bit. There's mica powders you can buy. These powders here are these are from Hobby Lobby. They're pretty nice. You can buy them on the internet too. But there's dyes, there's powders, there's pigments, there's, you know, just it's all out there. So.
But after you've cast it, I mean, and you're actually, so did you pre-color all of that resin before? No, you couldn't have. I'm like talking about cast it and you have a resin shape and then you're trying to colorize it.
This one right here, I cast this and painted the top of it, of course, and then that's just brown shoe polish that I wiped on there to kind of make it look like burl. And then you cast it in resin and it stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. It just stays on the piece. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Well, Steve, if you put shoe polish on that, is there a problem having the resin adhere to it since shoe polish is basically a wax?
Well, it wasn't a problem on this one. It seemed to work out pretty good. That was an experiment. I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but it seemed to work.
Steve, once you've turned a piece, what's your finishing process?
Well, that's the next step. I'm going to go over here to the lathe now.
Before you do that, you want to talk about use of tools at all? Is there anything you do differently with use of tools on the piece?
As far as turning tools?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't really use bowl gouges and spindle gouges and that kind of stuff on resin. All it does is just chip it out. I've seen guys on the internet using them, and I haven't figured out how they do that yet. I've tried and haven't figured out how to do it. So I end up turning pretty much everything with a negative rate scraper or a skew that I use as a scraper. And I don't use, I have, you can see them over there, right there. I have easy wood tools, but I try not to use them. There are times where I need to get into a small space or something, and I'll use my round easy wood tool. But for the most part, I try not to use those. But it does work. They say that carbide tools are the best thing to do for resin because it doesn't chip them out. But I just can't bring myself to use carbide tools all the time. So I try not to use them much at all. But I use scrapers and skews.
Have you
I'm sorry?
tried to use the negative rake on your easy tools?
Yes, I use negative rake on my easy tools. Yeah, that's another thing. There's been a couple of guys that use easy wood tools that are not negative rake, and they just tilt it a little bit, and I guess they put it at a certain angle, and I haven't really tried that yet, but I just go with the negative rake, and that way I don't have to worry about it when I use them. Like I said, I try not to use them unless I have to. And normally, like my finishing cut or something like that might be, if I'm not getting a good cut with the scraper, I'll either use the easy wood tool, or my skew is pretty much I'll get it right here. This skew right here is the one I use, and it's a good one. It works really well. I don't get any chip out. It's a really smooth cut. And Tom, I hope I'm sharpening it right. Okay.
If it works, you probably are.
Yep. Finishing resin. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time sanding and all that kind of stuff. But if you're turning your resin and you get the lines going this way, then you need to go this way, opposite way. And there's a guy named Jake Thompson who does, I think it's Northside Customs or Custom Crafts or something like that. Jake Thompson on YouTube. He has a video on sanding and polishing resin, and it's excellent. And he's the one that taught me out of that. You know, you got the lathe going like that, then stop it and go opposite direction until you've got all those little lines gone, until you can only see lines this way, and all the lines going this way are gone. Then you know you can go to the next grit. And I always do that. This is 80, but I didn't have to really start at 80. But once you get up to about 400, then I go to wet sanding, and I do basically the same thing. Wet sanding, depending on what I'm doing, like the pink rose, I went up to 2,000 on that. Then I I have my own abrasive paste that I use, and I also have like Hdpe, that kind of thing. I use that, and then you can either stop right there and go to like OB Shine Juice, or put a polish on there. And I normally take mine to, I have the Beal buffing system that I put on, and I buff them out, and that gets rid of the remaining little scratches. Okay, and that's pretty much how I finish things. Buffing is the big part of it. You got to have some kind of polish, some kind of I use, what's it called? What's that abrasive stuff for cars? Anyway, a compound. So I use that. It's just like using Hdpe and all that. It gets out all the little scratches and stuff. It's a scratch compound stuff. So I had planned on doing, I have a sphere jig. I planned on doing that today, but I made this too big, and I would have to make it a lot smaller. This only goes up to about 5 inches, and this is actually 6. So that's not going to work. But by the next meeting, I'll have this one done, and I'll have it on show and tell. Okay. Any questions? That pretty much concludes everything I have.
Well, Steve, thank you. Wow, that was fascinating. And you're the guy with all the cool tools too. I'm jealous.
Like I said, I'm a guy of convenience. I don't like to struggle on things. Can I get back over there? And I guess I'm pretty spoiled. We'll say that. But you know, I live by the. You know, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. So I'll get in trouble later.
Good philosophy until you find out otherwise.
Yeah.
No, I think that was just fantastic. I learned a lot. I've always wondered about some of the, pressure pots and vacuum chambers, and is my vacuum pump on my vacuum chuck good enough? No, it's not. It only goes up to about 25 inches of mercury, so got to get a better one.
Yeah.
But that helped me understand the process a lot better. Oh, I did think of one question just in my notes I forgot to ask. Shelf life on some of the chemicals, like your Alumalite and things like that, do they have, I know epoxies have a shelf life. What about some of the other things?
Alumalite will say that this is a shelf life of 3 months, but this particular Alumalite that I'm using right now, I've had it for like 5 months, and it still works fine.
Okay.
So I think they're just trying to get you to buy more. The shelf life on the Cactus Juice, it's forever until you actually, there's a little catalyst that they give you with it. Once you put the catalyst in there, you've got a year.
Oh, okay.
But that's, I mean, a year's a long time if you're doing a lot of stabilizing now. And one additional note on that is you don't really have to stabilize anything. If you're not really using punky wood, you're just using a piece of oak or walnut or whatever. As long as it's in fairly decent shape and not all punky, just dry it out and you can cast it. The one, zero. You want it 0. And like my gauge only goes to like 6% or something. So that's why I use the weight. I weigh it. As long as it keeps losing weight, then I know it's not dry. And once it quits losing weight, I know I'm at 0. And if you don't plan to cast it right away, put it like in a Ziploc bag or something like that, because your shop has humidity in the air. And as soon as that piece of wood is sitting out on the table, it's already starting to collect moisture. So you'll see guys on the internet, they'll stick it back in the toaster oven for a few minutes to make sure that there's no surface moisture on there, because that'll ruin your piece. I know that for a fact.
And you molded pearls. Don't have to worry about moisture in them, but you want to preheat them before you.
I do. Once they're cast, I don't have to worry about the inside. But sitting out like this, as a matter of fact, the one on the lathe, I set that one in the toaster oven for about 15 minutes at 150 degrees, just to make sure there was no moisture on there.
Steve, this is Barb. I have one more question for you. Getting back to your walnut pieces, and you talked about after you got them dried, you coated them. Did you actually coat them in resin, or did you use something else to coat them before you embedded them in the resin?
I coated them in resin.
Okay.
I took Tom's advice and bought some of that. It's called Mirror Coat.
Oh, okay.
You get it from Woodcraft. So I bought some of that. That stuff is, there's coating resins, there's casting resins, there's like tabletop resins, deep pour resins, and that's kind of a coating resin, and you can put that on something and make sure the bubbles are out of it, and it'll dry without a pressure pot. You just have to make sure all the bubbles are gone, but that'll coat your piece, and then you're good to go. It seals up so that no moisture can get to what you're trying to cast.
Great, thank you.
Steve, that mirror coat, would it work like on the inside of a cup or something that you're going to have water in or coffee?
I don't know. I would think it would, but haven't tried that. Hadn't even thought about it. So yeah, it probably would. If you put it on thin enough so it didn't run down into the bottom. But you know, there's people that do the cup thing where they have them little rotator deals where they coat the outside of a cup and put sprinkles and paint different colors and epoxies and that kind of stuff on the outside of a cup. And they use that kind of stuff, that coating resin.
Thank you.
I've just never used a whole lot of that. That's the only time I've ever used that, was just to do those walnut pieces.
Ross, this is Peter, and the answer is yes. I haven't used it for drinking, but I've used it to make containers to hold flowers. Not exactly a vase, but more of a flower container, for lack of a better term.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, any other questions for Steve this morning? Well, Steve, thanks so much again for sharing all that knowledge and experience with us. We learned a lot, and I wish we could do a better job of giving you a standing ovation and applause, but you have to take my word for it. We appreciate that. So good job.
Well, I know I jumped around quite a bit, but there's just a lot of information that it's hard to kind of put it in some kind of order. So that's why I was jumping around quite a bit.
No, you did a nice job. And I suspect the folks in the audience now know who the expert is, and you'll be getting some questions from us.
I mean, if anybody has any questions, they can just contact me, and if I know the answer, I'll help you out. If not, I'll try to find the answer for you.
All right. Well, thanks for that offer.